Hey guys, so Mr. Simpson here, and we are going to begin Unit 2, British Colonies, Revolution, and Early Republic. So it's going to be kind of a big unit, but we'll try to dive on in and get things going. So what I would recommend is to title your overall notes for this unit, this portion right here, and then for this section, this lecture video series that we're going to kind of see, the British Colonies from 1607 to 1754. All right, let's dive on in. So very quickly, you don't have to write these down. These are our learning targets. We're going to identify English settlements. We're going to talk about the differences between them. And we're going to look at interactions between Native Americans and the English specifically. Our essential questions are: what are the similarities and differences between the colonies? What role does religion play in these colonies being established? And how do those interactions with Native Americans affect the way the English perceive Native Americans? Okay, so here's our key vocabulary, just a quick heads up. You will see them embedded into the lecture videos. They will be highlighted and underlined, so that way you know that they're there when they come up, okay? So let's kind of go through this and get the ball rolling. So first, we're going to start with the Chesapeake Colonies. They're called this because of the area, the region that they're in present-day Virginia. Is called the Chesapeake Bay, and so we just call them Chesapeake Colonies. So our first colony is Jamestown in 1607 that we're going to talk about for the Chesapeake Colonies. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about Maryland. We'll move into some of the life and the social structures of these colonies and interactions with Native Americans, okay? So very quickly, the geography of the Chesapeake as a whole. We're talking a very bad soil that's not good for farming. We're talking really, really high salt in the water because it's an ocean coastal town. The Atlantic Ocean is what runs right up in it. We have the James River that Jamestown is settled on, and it's kind of freshwater, but the big problem is that there's lots of bugs because it's a huge swamp, okay? And the swamp has like salt in the water, that the mud and stuff that's in the salt, in the marshy area, you would think is, oh, well, that's perfect because, crops need water, but there's so much salt that it doesn't allow crops to grow effectively. And plus you can't drink it. So there's going to be some really, really big issues with this whole area. So a big fail on the colonists at Jamestown, but it winds up being a very successful colony and the first permanent colony in North America for the English. Okay, so here's Jamestown. The section in yellow, again, is what settled by 1650. And then we see this explosion 50 years later all around this. And again, all of this is just kind of marshy area. Jamestown is going to be right here along the James River. And then the first Maryland colony will be here at St. Mary's, okay? And we'll talk about that in a moment. But let's look at Jamestown specifically, okay? So Jamestown, again, is founded by the Virginia Company, which is a joint stock company. And remember, these guys are super wealthy, okay? And their goals are essentially they want to stay wealthy. They're there to find gold. They're not really trying to establish a permanent settlement. They're there to find gold and find a passage to India. Again, the goal was to get to India. They don't want to rely on Muslim middlemen who are taking their goods anymore because they wind up having to pay higher prices. They want to be able to transport it themselves. So they're hoping that, well, this continent can't be that big. They were wrong, but they didn't know that then because map making wasn't as good as it is now. And they want to defeat the Spanish. But overall, they just want to make more wealth for their shareholders and wealth for themselves, okay? So they weren't really trying to find a permanent establishment yet, but they did. So here's what some problems we find right away. Okay, disease again is a big deal. It's a huge swamp, lots of mosquitoes. We have yellow fever and malaria, and again the water is terrible, so you can't drink it. So it's just a really, really what we call a perfect storm of just bad. All right, so it leads to this period of time called the starving time, which I'm pretty sure you could see coming a mile away, where there's just no food, and so these men resort to raiding and stealing food from the Powhatan, which is not a good idea, but it happens. And so there are some instances of some cannibalism where one man winds up killing his wife during the harsh winter and eats her. And essentially, but again, it's an isolated experience. And again, we see 15% of the total population of colonists rather that wind up surviving because it's just a horrible nightmare scenario. Brutal winter, lack of water, lack of food. It's just terrible. And so lack of diversity is one issue that we say. It's mostly men, and it's mostly young men who are there. And they don't get along much with each other, but they certainly don't get along with the Algonquin people, who they named the Powhatan after their leader. And so uh, there's just kind of this perfect storm: disease, lack of water, they're starving. There's a bunch of men, a lot of testosterone, and it's just a bad situation altogether. But never fear, tobacco's here. What? That's right, tobacco. Okay. So this guy named John Rolfe, which you might remember, marries Pocahontas. Aww. He discovers that tobacco is the perfect crop for this climate and this soil. Um, and so tobacco requires just a specific environment, and that marshy, swampy environment was perfect. The problem is it's terrible on the soil, so they have to keep going further and further and further inland, which creates more problems with Native Americans. Plus, there's this high demand for tobacco in Europe, so it's perfect. They can grow tobacco, sell it in Europe, and make tons of money, which is why Jamestown becomes successful. Okay, tobacco is the reason Jamestown becomes so successful. All right, so this impact means that their geographic development spreads. As we saw on that map, they go from these small little clusters of yellow to lots of green within a span of 50 years. And tobacco is really one of the reasons for that. Um, we also see this new labor force coming in because tobacco is such a labor intensive crop. So we're going to see some enslaved Africans, but this new group coming in called indentured servants, which I'll explain shortly. Please know that in 1619, that this is the first date of enslaved Africans being brought in for tobacco cultivation, but this is not when race-based slavery as we know it in the 1800s begins. Okay, here's a painting depicting a life on a plantation around 1670, and you can see that the different enslaved peoples are working tobacco crops. And so this is kind of just show that it takes a lot of work, because once it's grown, you have to dry it out in order to actually use it. Okay. Um, Quickly about Maryland. Maryland is what's known as a proprietary colony, meaning that the colony is owned by a specific person with permission from the British Crown. Okay, and so that person is Lord Baltimore, who founds it in 1632 as a haven for Catholics. It's this place of religious freedom for all people who believe in Jesus. But if you don't, he's going to kill you. Okay, here's Lord Baltimore in all his fury. Look at that chin beard. It's very, very impressive. All right, and so this is where Maryland is. Present day, this is what Maryland looks like. At the time, it wasn't as large. It was really just kind of this section right here because we need water. We want access to the ocean for shipping and stuff like that. And St. Mary's is the first town that's established in Maryland. Okay, so let's move into the life and labor of the Chesapeake very quickly. The social structure is planters, these people who are growing these huge plantation farms of tobacco. It's a very few numbers of those. This new group called indentured servants. We have some small farmers, and we also have enslaved Africans, but it's a very small amount of enslaved Africans. And the reason that it's a very small amount is because it's too expensive, which I'll explain shortly. Too expensive for enslaved Africans at the time, and so the planters are like, no, we're going to use these indentured servants because it's cheaper for us. Please note that this is not the beginning of race-based slavery. Okay, slavery at this time is used, but it's more as a means of protecting your financial interests, as opposed of we don't like black people, therefore we are going to use them as slaves. That's what it turns into, and that's what we'll talk about next week. Okay, so let's talk about planters really quickly. Planters are these English gentry, super wealthy men who are growing tobacco on these large farms called plantations. Okay, planters, plantations. Okay, their farms are called plantations, right? And they rely upon this new group of indentured servants, and here's why: because of this something called a head right system. Okay, the head right system is pretty simple. If the planter brings over one indentured servant, they get 50 extra acres of land to cultivate. And as we know, tobacco takes a lot of land to cultivate because it's so hard on the land. So it's their best interest to bring over these indentured servants. Okay, indentured servants, please know this is a picture here of indentured servitude. And please know that indentured servants are not wealthy people, and they're not usually black people, African people. These are young white men from England who are super poor and don't have any opportunities in England. So they're going to jump at this chance because all they have to do is agree to work for 3 to 7 years on a plantation. And in exchange, they're going to get land and supplies when they finish. I'll do that. Bet. Let's go. Here's the big problem. They are highly likely to die because, you guessed it, disease. All right. And so it's in the best interest of the planters to bring over these indentured servants because they know that the indentured servants are not likely to survive. And so they can just keep bringing them over because remember, every one that they bring over, they get more what? Land. That's right. So they're going to bring over as many as they can, which is why indentured servants make up the largest group in the Chesapeake area. Okay. And why planters are so few. We're going to talk about why that becomes a problem next week. Okay. Small farmers are those who wind up completing their indenture, which is why there's so few of them, because not many make it that far. But if they do, they wind up having very, very small farms and hopes of becoming a planter themselves. And we do have some enslaved Africans, but that's very, very few because they are too expensive because it costs like, I think I remember reading it was like 15 pounds English currency for one. But why would you want to pay that if you could just get an indentured servant to come for free and probably not finish? Okay, so that's indentured servitude in a nutshell. Okay, so here's an indenture contract, and as you can see here, it says 3 years. You can read the reasons why this person came. It's from Pennsylvania, but it still applies to the Chesapeake. Okay, so interaction with the Native Americans. Initially, we have this plan of peace and agreement, but after 1610, we see this no peace. And again, to prevent the starving time from persisting, John Smith says, "Hey, we got to work, otherwise we're not going to be able to eat. We're not going to be able to survive." So they wind up working, and that creates this peace with Native Americans. But in 1610, we see that completely change where the British Crown is like, you know what, no peace. We're going to exterminate as many as possible. So we see this Anglo-Powhatan Wars, which just a series of wars fought between the Powhatan and the English to prevent the English from further spreading into their territory. Because that's what the English are doing, because guess what? That headright system pays a lot of money. So they want that land, okay? So the Powhatans are either killed or they're forced to just leave their area. But it changes the perceptions of how English look at Native Americans. So if we see this woodcut here, we can see the Native Americans are just overwhelmingly just massacring the British. And this is done by a British artist named Matthias Marion. And check this scene out right here. We have this Native American who is stabbing an Englishman in the back while he's just trying to work. I mean, he's just trying to work. But this is the perception that the English have following these Anglo-Powhatan wars, as well as some that we're going to see happening as well in the New England colonies, that these Native Americans are savages, they're just bloodthirsty, and they're coming after us. But the only reason they're fighting is because the British were moving into their territory. And here's how the British really see themselves. We're just coming for peace. We're just here for peace. And so you see them here, but look what they have on their shoulders. They've got guns. Here they are with guns pointing them at, but we're just negotiating peace. So please know that these Anglo-Powhatan wars in the Chesapeake start changing the perception of the British. And this is why we see them going full out war and just pushing Native Americans off their land, because they want that land because of this headright system. And so they're willing to do anything for it. And the British Crown is like, we want tobacco, we want to make money, there's money there, let's do it, just remove them. And so that's what we see taking place. In the next video, we're going to talk about the New England colonies, which is just a whole different ball game. Peace. Have a great day.